Hello, I'm Joseph Ortiz from Palm Middle School, and I'll be showing you my calculator that I made in Android. So, the calculator can do, normal calculator stuff. It can add, it can multiply, it can even do stuff like square roots. But how does it all work? Well, there is one part of the calculator, the XML, which is basically, as you can see, where everything is put, where all the buttons are, where all the text is. It's all that kind of stuff. And that's basically the layout of the calculator. However, it still doesn't do any of the logic or any of the mathematical calculations. All of that stuff is handled in the Java code. Now, the Java code is necessary because not only does it do all of the mathematical calculations and all the logic, but without the Java code, pressing a button wouldn't even do anything because all of that stuff is handled in the Java code. Now, there's a lot of code, so I'll only go over a few things. So first, I want to talk about this on-click method. And the method on click will basically be called, or everything in here will activate whenever we press a button or anything with an on click. Now, that's usually a button. So, whenever I press a button, we come down to this method and something happens. Now, let's say I press the clear button. So I press clear. Now, what the clear does is if you have any like things, inputs, and your output, it will all get reset. So what we do is first we take this num input variable. Now the num input variable can be either the first input, so this would be the first input, the first number we're putting in. And this would be the second input, the second number we're putting in. And then this is the output, and the output is counted as num input 3. So we're obviously going to want to be back on the first input when we clear. So we're going to reset num input to 1. Then we also want to reset the num input 1 to reset to 0 and set the num input to, or not the num input. We want to set the input 1, the first input to 0, and the second input also to 0. So reset those. And then we also want to reset the text, which is what the user sees. So they can see that we did actually clear everything and the stuff isn't still stuck on there. And then there's other things like why don't we go down to negate part. So this is the negate button, and it turns things turns positive numbers negative, negative numbers positive, basically makes things negative. Um, Now, first we have to check if we're on the first input or we're on the second input. Remember, this is the first number we put in, and then this is the second number we put in. And if we're on the second number and then we press the negate button, we don't want it to change the first number or vice versa. So, this will check if we're on the first input. And if we are on the first input, we're going to take our input and we're going to call this negate function. And what the negate function does is it will basically add this little negative sign on the end. So we can do all sorts of stuff, but if we press negate, it will call the negate function and add that little negative sign on the end. And then it's also going to set the text so the user sees that it is working and that their button is actually doing something. And if we're on the second input, it will do the exact same thing, but for the second number instead of the first. Now, there are other functions. Now, onClick is kind of built into Java. All this stuff, or Android Studio, all the stuff that I put into it wasn't there already, but this was built in Java. But there's also methods that I have to make myself. Like, we'll come down here to the input method. So this is called whenever we press one of these number buttons, it adds the number with the input method. So first we have to pass in a number, of course. Now, come down here and we have to check if we're on the first input or the second input again. Now, if we're on the first input, then we're going to add our number to it. However, we're not mathematically adding. Because see, if we're mathematically adding, then if I had a 5 and then I press 6, we get 11. But we don't get 11, we get 56. So why is that? Well, the key thing is that this input, the first number input and the second number input, are actually not numbers, they're strings. And what a string is, it's basically text. Now, you can't really do math with text. You can't add like A and B. And to the computer, this 5, it's text, so it doesn't know how to do math with it yet. We actually need to do math. We can kind of tell the computer to turn it into a number, and it will do that, and then we can do math with it. But right now it's not. It's just like letters, text. So when we try to add something to it, instead of doing mathematical adding, it just will concatenate it, which means we're just going to put it on the end. So that's why we can do these numbers, because we're just going to put the number on the end. And then we're also going to want to reset the text, or set the text to what the input is now, so the user knows that something happened. So that something happens. And if we're on the second input instead, we'll do the exact same, but for the second input, of course. But what about one of the functions that actually does a mathematical, evaluation? Well, how about the exponent function? Now it takes in the base and the power, because an exponent has base and power. Let's say we could have a base of 2 and a power of 6. That basically means 2 times 6, no, 2 times 2, 6 times. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, and so on. Now, first, if a base is 0, then we want to return 0, because 0 to the power of anything is 0, except for 0 to the power of 0, that's undefined, but we'll ignore that. So then we create this variable which will just hold a value. It's going to hold what we need to return and print out to the user. So then in this for loop, which basically the for loop just repeats whatever we have in here a set amount of times. Now we're going to repeat the power amount of times, because remember, something like 2 to the 6th power, that's going to be 2 times 2 6 times. So if we if we have base to the power of power, then we're going to want to multiply the base by the base of power amount of times. So we get the exponent variable we have, which we set to 1, and then we're going to multiply the base, the power amount of times. So let's say we have 2 to the power of 6 again. Well, that means we're going to multiply 1 by 2, so that's 2, then 2 times 2, that's 4, 4 times 2, that's 8, so on, until we do it 6 times. And then we'll return that value. However, you might notice that we're taking the absolute value of our power, and that is because we need the absolute value of the power, since we can't really do something a negative amount of times. However, we do have to do something different if our power is negative. So that's what this check is for here. So we check if the power is less than 0, meaning it is negative. And if you have a negative exponent, then you actually just return 1 over the exponent, or the what you would normally get. So if we have like 2 to the 4th power, we get 16. However, 2 to the negative 4th power, that will get us 0.0625, which is different. That then we can't really print out a fraction, so it's converted to a decimal. But if this was a fraction, it would be 1 over 16 in its simplified form. And yeah, that's basically how my Android calculator works. There's a lot of other things, but I don't really have enough time to show that right now. So that's about it.